everyone, this is Teresa from Base 10 Montessori, and today we are going to go over the next lesson on the fraction insets. Now, if you missed the first video, I would recommend that you go back and take a look at that first lesson because that really sets the foundation for what we're doing today. In the first video, we introduced the fractions to a 3.5-year-old, and by the time we get to this new lesson, the child will be 5.5 years old. So for 2 years, they've been working on the lessons that I showed you in the very first video. So it's really important that you go back to that first video, take a look at everything that happens there, and then come back to this video so that you can get the new lesson on nomenclature. So when we're talking about nomenclature, we're really going to be giving lessons on what the fractions are, how do we talk about the fractions, what are the labels for these fractions, and how do we write them. And so there are several lessons that go into this lesson on nomenclature. So that's all we're going to do today is talk about the nomenclature and get through these lessons. And like I said before, the child who is getting this lesson is going to be around 5.5. And that child has already done a lot of math work with other materials in the classroom at this time. They've already done addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division on several different materials in the classroom. So when they get to the fractions and they're ready for this nomenclature lesson, we're simply going to be starting with the labels. We're not going to be getting into operations just yet. That's going to be in the third video in this series. So today we're just going to introduce how to talk about and how to identify and how to write the fractions. So the very first presentation, we're going to come over to our table and we're going to have a unit bead with us. And we're going to pull out the whole. And in the AMI album, the way we start to present this is we remind the child about their lesson they had a really long time ago with the colored globe and the sandpaper globe. Now, when we're reminding them of what it was like to work with the globe, we're going to remind them that the globe was really round. And when they started working with the puzzle maps, we had to flatten that globe down in order to make it a map. So again, we want to take this lesson and we want to relate it back to something they already know, something they're familiar with. And that familiarity comes with the globe, and it also comes with the golden unit bead. So those are two things that the child has already worked with, that they're familiar with before they get this lesson. So when we're talking about introducing the nomenclature for the fractions, we're going to start out with this unit bead and say, you know what, this is the smallest part of the decimal system that we have worked with in the classroom, right? 1 unit right here, and it's round. And just like the globes and the maps, we can smash it down and flatten it. And when we do that, it looks just like this. This is a whole, and this is a whole. These are each a unit. And when we do that, these are exactly the same. And if these are exactly the same thing, we don't need this, do we? So once we've done that, we're going to start talking about the names of the different families. So we've already said that this is the whole, and that is just like the unit bead. It's one whole, but the whole can be broken down into several pieces. For instance, this right here, this one is broken down into 2 pieces, and we call that the family of the halves. This is the family of the thirds. And then we're going to go ahead and introduce the name of each family. So we'll go through the fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, eighths, ninths, and tenths. So we're going to introduce all of the names of the families. And that very simply is the first part of the first lesson. The second part of the first lesson is the Bring Me game. So if you are a Montessori teacher, if you have some Montessori training, or if you've just been around Montessori enough, you probably already know the Bring Me game because we play it with pretty much anything we give language to in the classroom. We will do the Bring Me game. So you can sit with the child or you can sit at a distance. It depends on how much help or support the student needs. And you can very simply say, can you bring me 1/3? Can you bring me the family of the fifths? Can you bring me 1/2? Can you bring me 2/6? And so you want to go through this at whatever speed the child is comfortable with. If they're picking up on it really fast, you can go specifically into, 5/9. But if they're not picking it up very fast, if they're really kind of slow at picking this up, if this is hard for them, just say, can you bring me the family of the thirds? And then when they bring it to you, you can say, well, what did you bring me? And hopefully they'll say the family of the thirds. And that is how we do the second part of the lesson. So it starts very simply. And again, this lesson is geared towards a 5.5-year-old. So they should be picking up on this pretty quickly, but it's okay that they're not. And so when you're thinking about how to present this, just make sure and individualize to each student's needs. The next part of the lesson has to do with the history of fractions and the history of the word fraction and how we write it. The next part of the lesson is all about storytelling. So if you like to tell stories and you like history, this part of the lesson is for you. Now, before we get into it, if your student is picking up on this really quickly, you can go through the nomenclature lessons all in one day, or you can break it up into different days. So it really depends on the needs of your student, whether or not you're presenting this all at once or breaking it up into smaller lessons over different days. But this part of the lesson has to do with the history of fractions. And we start out by telling a story. So once upon a time, there were a group of people called the Romans. And the Romans had a special word called fractus. And the word fractus means to break down into smaller pieces. And that's what we're doing here. We're breaking things down into smaller pieces. Now, when the Romans were working with these fractions, they would write, for example, 1 fractus 2 to represent 1/2. After a while, writing 1 fractus 2 or writing out the word fractus really took a long time. So they shortened it up. And instead of writing 1 fractus 2, they wrote 1F2. After a while, even that was a little bit much. So they started using a line instead of letters or words. And after we tell them this little story, we're going to show them how to write this on paper. We're going to show them that it looks like this. 1 fractus 2 looks like this. Instead of writing the word fractus or instead of writing the letter F, we're going to just draw a line. 2 fractus 3 becomes 2/3. So now we have 1/2 and 2/3. And at this point, you can start getting out pieces from your metal insets and ask the child, well, what is this? And remember, we've been doing the Bring Me game, so they should be able to identify the different families and how many that you're taking out within that family. And so you can ask the child, now, what is this called? 1/2. And then you can show them, this is how we write 1/2. Maybe you can go over to the fourths and you can say, what is this? This is the family of the fourths. And how many did we take out? We took out 1. So that looks like this, 1/4. And if we take out 2 from the family of the fourths, it's going to look like this, 2/4. And as we're going through and showing them how to write this, we're going to show them that the bottom number is the family name. So if we are working with the family of the thirds, the family name always goes on the bottom. And then you can ask the child, well, what is your family name? What's your last name? And if they say, my last name is Smith, then you say, that's just like the family name for the thirds. So you have a family name, but you also have an individual name. And that individual name goes on the top. And for fractions, that tells us how many goes on top. And so if we have 2 out, then we're going to write 2 on top. We're going to say there are 2 from the family of the thirds. And the family name, we call that a denominator. And the number that's on top that tells us how many, that's called the numerator. And from there, you could even do a 3-period lesson if you wanted on numerator and denominators just to make sure that they can identify the language. But again, this is a nomenclature lesson, so getting that language in there and helping them identify what is the numerator and what is the denominator is an important part of this lesson. Now, the very last part of the nomenclature lesson has to do with matching to labels. So you can print out labels, you can handwrite labels, just have a ton of labels laid out so the child can work at identifying things. And you can give them a bunch of labels each day and ask them to identify them. Well, where is 2/7? What does that look like? What does 2/7 look like? And they can go 5, 6, 7, 1, 2. Again, here's our family name. We're working with the family of the sevenths. How many are we working with? 2. And that's what 2 sevenths looks like. So they can very easily be at a table and just start matching to these labels. Now, the next part that you could do is matching at a distance. And again, if you're familiar with Montessori, if you're familiar with presenting language in an AMI format, matching at a distance is something we do a lot in the classroom, and it can be done with a lot of different materials. And the reason why we do a lot of matching at a distance is because it helps the child work their memory systems. If you don't have a lot of training in Montessori, if you don't have a lot of experience with it, matching at a distance is something you can include in your environment, whether it's a homeschool environment or a preschool classroom or a kindergarten classroom. This is something you can do with just about any material that you are working with in your classroom. Matching at a distance, doing something at a distance. And how that works is you're going to set up your fraction labels at one table or maybe on a rug, and you'll have your labels in one place, and then put your fraction insets way far away at a different location. And so when the child is working with 2 sevenths, they will take their label, they will put it on their rug or their table, and they're going to have to say to themselves, okay, 2 sevenths, 2 sevenths. And they're going to have to keep that number in their mind. The label will stay at the table or at the rug, and they're going to have to walk all the way over to where those fraction insets are. And they're going to have to remember, what is it? What family am I working with? Okay, I'm working with the family of the sevenths. How many do I need to get? I need to get 2. 1, 2. And they're going to bring these back in their hand, and they're going to bring it back to their label. And then they're going to see, okay, did I get it correct? How many am I working with? 2. And it's the family of the sevenths. And so anytime in your classroom, you can take a material and split it up into a distance, that is going to work their memory. They're going to have to hold that image, that thought, that visual cue in their mind while they go and do the thing that is here at their work rug or at their table. And I do this with more materials in my classroom than what was shown in my album. For instance, I will do this with the decanomial square. I'll have them build the decanomial square in one place, but I'll keep the pieces over in a different place. And for the children who need a lot of walking, who need a lot of movement, that works great. So even if you are AMI trained, think about all the different ways you can do matching at a distance or working at a distance. If you're not in a Montessori classroom, you can do this with puzzle pieces. You can have your puzzle frame over here and your puzzle pieces over here, have them in 2 different places, and the child can go look at their puzzle, and then they can come back to their puzzle pieces and say, I need this one next. Whatever gets them moving and whatever works their memory system is going to be very beneficial in the long run. So just a little reminder that the fractions are not the only place that we do matching at a distance. So those are all the lessons that go with nomenclature. Again, the age for this lesson and these subset of lessons is going to be around 5.5. So we're going to spend 2 years working sensorially with these fractions before we give a direct lesson on them. So around 5.5 is the age we introduce this. And what is the control of error? What is going to tell the child that they're doing this work correctly? And for this lesson, with the nomenclature, the control of error is within the material. That means that this material is exploratory. That means you can observe what they're doing and you can see that they're getting 2 sevenths out, or you can see that maybe they're still getting mixed up. But everything comes down to you as the teacher to observe their work, to see, well, can they identify the family of the fourths and pick out 3? So we're not going to come along and just hover over their shoulder and correct every little mistake, because we know that this is a process. We know that it takes time, and we don't want to be correcting mistakes all the time. If they're having trouble, if they're not getting this, and you're observing that, the best thing that you can do, first of all, is observe where they're getting stuck. Represent this lesson. And the best way to do that, the best way to sometimes represent a lesson to an older child, is to actually present it to a younger child who hasn't had this lesson yet, and have them help you out. Have them be your helper. And again, peer learning is really important, especially when you get into the older children. If you're introducing this to a child who is 6 and they're kind of tipping into that second plane of development, they're going to need social learning. That means they're going to have to work with somebody. They're going to have to work with a friend. If you have a student that's struggling, represent this material and try to do it in a way that's not so obvious that you're giving them this lesson again. And of course, if it's an older student, always include social learning, group learning, learning with a friend, working with a friend. These materials are supposed to be enjoyed. That doesn't mean we play around with them. That doesn't mean we destroy them. It doesn't mean that we disturb concentration. It means that the work is purposeful and they get to enjoy doing this with somebody that they get along with. And of course, as always, what is the direct purpose of this specific lesson? Well, it's the nomenclature, right? Understanding the names of the families, understanding what it looks like to write fractions, understanding the words numerator and denominator. That's the whole point of this lesson. It's not to be perfect. We know that self-perfection is a long journey and a long process. So we're not here to demand perfection of our students. We're here to start the journey of exploration. And so if you become too negative about it, if you become too obsessed with correcting their work, you're going to destroy that process. You're going to destroy that journey. You're going to destroy the exploration. And if you keep an older child from working with a friend constantly and only let them work by themselves, and they're not handling that well, you're also going to destroy their love for this material. Now, I understand if they get too silly with other friends, obviously you have to have consequences and boundaries in your classroom, but don't shy away from what the child needs to learn. We can be flexible, we can be creative, we can adapt, and we can do trial and error. We can see if something works. Don't be afraid to try something that might not work, right? Sometimes that's how we know whether or not we should do something, is just by trying. Can't always predict the future. So sometimes you just need to take a risk and see if it works out. So anyways, that's all I have for you today. I hope you like this second video on fractions. And the next video, the third video, will be the last one. And I'm going to go over all the different operations with the fractions. So I hope you're looking forward to that third video. And if you like what I'm doing here, don't forget to press that like button, like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you in the next video.